Dominique Stewart.
Here.
Rachel Henderson.
Here.
Dale Galkey.
Here.
Amber Kirsten.
And let's stand for the pledge of allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The school district of the Menomonie area, by embracing the unique needs and using the strengths of our diverse community, is dedicated to preparing all students to become lifelong learners, caring individuals, and responsible citizens. Do we have any revisions to the agenda order tonight? None. We will move on. Staff, board members, or administrators. The opinions, beliefs, and viewpoints expressed by the various speakers do not necessarily reflect the opinions, beliefs, or viewpoints of individual board members, the board as a whole, or the school district of the Menomonie area, nor do they reflect the policies of the SCMA. We have two speakers tonight. First up is Josie Tillman. We want our professional teachers to always tell it is a dangerous thing to young or let's say tell a lie often. Our gender policy plan in the SBNA is based on a couple of lies. One lie is that the person is taken as gender. This is not true. If the person is born a gender, they remain that gender their entire life. They do not change their mind. No matter how they feel, they can never change their biological sex. No boy or girl is born into a kid should not put a dress on a 6-year-old boy and send off to school to confuse himself and teaching the kid. Cannot take a child born of welcome to the rest of 30 years everything success. I am telling you the truth. Your sexual identity is what your biology for your parents and brought to that. The figure act otherwise is not just foolish, it's dangerous. One statistic from England showed that youngsters who thought they might like to change their sex. When they began to transition, were 19 times more suicidal than a gender-confused person making the decision to remain with their biological gender. Wise counseling and telling our children the truth is always best for mental health. Listen to the stories of regret for children who have been weak born, believe the lie, and transition. We want our chosen by rights teachers some food. We do not want to be told by our own DPI or some publisher that children can change their sex. We also do not want to tell our children that deviant homosexual behavior carries no harmful consequences. We want our teachers to estimating our school board is giving information and advice about harmful and critical thought to our teachers and children. I would encourage all of the school boards to do that, posting now. I also encourage you to come to the meeting on Thursday, August 3rd at Coyote at 6:30, where you can be informed about the lives and control of our children. Dr. Fidelis would like to teachers, invite the parents of all students, invite the community members, be informed so you can know the truth and tell the truth and promote the truth in our community. Thank you. Thank you. And next up we have Lynn Houseman. Did I say that right?
And I'm just here to say thank you. I know you're not doing this job for the big bucks that you get paid, and it's just so very, very important that you continue to support public education. The future of our country depends on public education. And thank you.
Thank you. Right. Next we have the personnel consent agenda. Entertain a motion to approve the personnel consent agenda.
Second. Oh. Mark.
Moved by Abe, second by Mark. We've got a couple things on here. Did you want to say anything, Joe?
Great, I just wanted to point out to board members, there was a late addition, and it's the employment of Michelle Diane Holloway as a new activities director and community service director effective August 1st. So we're looking forward to Michelle joining our school district.
Thank you, and thanks to all the work that went into that hiring process and the little song. Any questions or comments? On the agenda? Let's vote. And motion passes 8-0. And all we got is discussion items tonight. First up is the annual student services report.
So as part of the district work plan, there's a number of items that deal with our student services department. And Tony Kwiski has been our student service director. This is going on year 11, I believe, Tonya.
Yeah.
So her and her team do a great job. And this report, as you've noticed probably in reading through it, board members, is very comprehensive. And Tony's not going to read the whole thing tonight. There's a number of items she's going to point out. So Tony, go ahead and take it over.
Well, the report today just reviews a few different departments that I can oversee. The first off, we'll talk about special education. I think the big thing in special ed for this school year is we are in the process of doing our self-assessment. It's a multi-year process. This past year, we did some compliance things, sent data, sent DPI, things like timely evaluation, things like that. But this year is kind of a big year. We do a file review. I'm hoping to do that before the school year starts. So in the summer, I'm going to pull some staff in. There's very strict procedures that we use. We randomly select student files, and then we do a compliance on those files. And I kind of gave you an overview of what that is. There is 4 areas that we look at evaluation and 23 areas that we look at each IEP that we get selected. This is just a way for us to determine whether we are meeting compliance, whether our IEPs are written correctly. It is really used as a teaching tool, so we'll use this data. And then any areas that we are not doing well on, it's an opportunity for us to grow in those particular areas. So it really is a self-assessment. It's for us to review the files and for us to grow as a student position. I gave you some data on our personally placed private school students. We have 3 private schools currently, and 2 of the private schools, we have students that we serve because they are identified with special needs. And historically, we use one of our speech and English pathologists spends 1 day a week at our private school providing direct services to kids. And that will continue into next year. Giving you some data on, we do, as you know, we do student counts, but there's another count, a special ed count, that's October 1st, and that's the count we use for special education. And I gave you some data, and yes, our numbers have been growing over the last 5 years. And then, if you want to have any questions, do we wait till the end, or do you want me to do each area? If you have questions, you can just show up.
So questions about special education and if board members have any, but before I just want to point out, Tony just mentioned something very important. And if you look at the student count, if you go back to October 1st, 2017, 491 students were identified as having special education needs in an IEP, whereas in 2022, it was up to 578. So that's quite an increase. So you can see we have had to increase staffing as well. And, you know, sometimes I think people wonder, well, why are we staffing with, continuing to hire special education teachers and paraeducators. And really, that's the reason why our student count has gone up, and the services, really vary for individual child, mandated through their IEP. So, Tony and her team continue to do caseload factoring every year, determining how much service and how much staffing is needed. And, we continue, I think, to do as good as we can, providing those services to our kids. But, special education teachers are getting more and more difficult to find. There was a shortage a few years ago, now it's an extreme shortage. And, we're very thankful for our staffing that we have in special education.
All right, the next area is section 504. So these are accommodation plans that we write for students who are identified as having a physical or mental impairment. And these plans are accommodations that happen within a regular education environment. For example, there might be a student that, because of a medical condition, has to frequently miss school. And so they may have a plan that talks about how they make up their assignments, how they make up any tests, how some of the attendance requirements are waived because they're missing because they're at doctor's appointments. The plan is monitored by our English language learners. A little bit, we use what's called the access test. So this testing window typically runs from December to February. It looks at students' English language proficiency skills. They get a score on that. And then that's how we determine kind of the level of services that they need, those supports. And then I kind of review some of the staffing. And then some of our own languages, I would say Hmong is our highest, with Spanish being next. But as you can see, usually we have a variety of variety of different languages, kind of singleton languages.
On the ELL section, so I think the staff listed is teachers specializing in English language learning, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
What's the situation for interpreters to help with native?
Those are typically our paraeducators. So we have paraeducators that speak Hmong, and then this past year we had one paraeducator that spoke Spanish. We've also utilized community members. I've contacted the international office, especially for those singleton languages, where we don't have anyone that speaks Arabic. So we need to utilize that. We utilize different technology tools now to help with that. Some families will come with another family member. We have many, sometimes those singletons are actually still professors. They sometimes come with somebody that speaks English very well, and they're always very open to help come in and help, especially for meetings, and help us interpret that. So, yeah.
This is another one, if you look at the numbers, I don't think many people in our community realize that we have over 150 students that are receiving language services, where English isn't their first language.
And then the last area is our gifted and talented. Right now, within our state, 27 students this year were identified as gifted and talented. We do a testing process in order to determine kind of their level. The highest level is the level where they have an individual written plan. They sometimes talk about like alternatives, pathways, really, in order to kind of advance in other opportunities for them. I encourage you to watch the Rethink and Giftedness video if you haven't watched that. I think it's a very powerful video, and it had really made me actually rethink how we provide services to students that are identified. Oh, I guess it wasn't the last one. Health services. So, kind of go over our staffing. I thought this was very interesting. Last year we had over 16,000 office visits reported in our district. I think that is a lot, but that includes every child that comes in for a Band-Aid or an ice pack or because they have a headache. So it does include all of those kind of minor things as compared to other major things, like students that are coming more on a daily basis. And I kind of go over some of the major health conditions that are school health assistants and nurse
So I have a question on this page. So yeah, as you point out, 16,213 student health office visits.
Yeah.
One school nurse and then 5 building assistants.
Yeah.
Is that enough staff for 16,000?
I think so. I really do. I think we have shifted our health assistants. We've actually, because of COVID, we actually increased that. And my recommendation was to continue those because I think they are very valuable. Many of them have nursing degrees. They're just not, they're not up to that RN level or school nurse level. And then Rainy really helps just monitor that and keeps the flow of traffic going. Our health assistants do a really phenomenal job in the building. I do think it's appropriate staffing. Like I said, many of those office visits are very quick. They're not a long office visit. You know, the child falls on the playground and an ice pack is all they really need, and a smile and kind of guide them back to class. So, okay.
Many of these conditions that are being handled are are pretty challenging.
Yeah.
So yeah, those numbers kind of struck me as making sure we have enough staff. If you think we do, I trust you, but definitely something to keep in mind, make sure there's not a burnout situation going on.
And then we also have the Reaching Brighter Smiles program, so it's a dental program for students that need dental care. So they come into our buildings, provide some dental care to families that don't necessarily have access to dental care. And so every year they kind of give us an end of the year report, and so that's kind of the end of the year report of all the dental kind of how many times they've done fluoride and things like that for students. Right? It's a really great program. It's service for our students. All right, any questions? That was a lot.
Very small one. The 86 504 students?
Yep.
Are they all categorized also under special education?
No.
Some are, none are.
If you don't.
Thank you.
Health services, how do you deal with those on that?
Well, that's some people that really helps handle. I think our office staff also do a really great job. We don't tend to have a lot of medical needs out in those buildings. If we would have a student that had some more healthcare needs that are up there that they need more daily support, that a conversation with the family would be, is it better for you to come into one of our bigger buildings or move it for staffing? That could also be an option. But we typically, it just works out that way. We typically don't have as many healthcare.
Quick question, it's just more curiosity than anything. 21, 22, and 22, 23, virtually identical amount of students enrolled. 274 and 273, if you see the chart.
Bridging by the slides. Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
sorry, I
Making
should
sure.
have clarified that,
Yep.
apologize. But why such a larger number in 2023 virtually for all categories? Just more students?
Oh,
You get what I'm saying?
The
Like-
cleaning.
Well, the cleanings and the varnishes and everything is so much higher in 22, 23,
It
with
could,
the same number of
with
students.
the same number of students, it could be just based on, the students that are, when they come into the building, if the student is not present, then they don't get a cleaning. They don't get a cleaning, they would have to wait until the next year. So it could be just based on that, it could be that they're, just their process of how they're seeing kids. So I'm not involved in their data collection. I can certainly ask that question, but that's kind of what I was.
It's also possible there was hesitancy on parents' consent in 2021 with COVID yet. Some folks not feeling comfortable with people in their face or whatever.
It's good to see that.
Yeah.
One final thing to point out, at the end of Tony's report, she mentioned staffing, and, you can see that Tony oversees the program. There is one behavior coach, two school social workers, school psychologists, dean of school, 10 school counselors. The school psychologist piece is a real concern, and I think we've shared that with the board previously. Tony, how many vacancies are there across the state? It was over 50 or something.
Yeah, the last time I looked, there was 16.
And we have a vacancy as well, and it's been open, Sam, since March or something, and there just are not enough school psychologists around. And where that really comes into play is all of the reporting and all of the observing and all of the identifying that goes on with special education. So Tony and her team have been working on perhaps a different model where we take our existing school psychologists and provide them with support services. There are certain roles that only certified school psychologists can complete, and those are kind of non-negotiable. But what we're trying to identify are other parts of their position where those duties could be handled by someone who's still trained and still has expertise in certain parts of the area, but maybe not the full-blown school psychologist certification. So it's going to be something that's a little unique. I think we're probably ahead of the curve on this. I'm sure there's many other school districts that are in a similar boat. We're very fortunate to have the school psychologists that we have, but we're going to have to be creative to ensure that we're able to serve all of our students for the upcoming year.
Just a quick clarification on that. You said we have one position open. So does that mean we have 4 school psychologists working now, trying to add that?
On the bottom of the chart, Virgin Brighter Smiles.
Yeah.
I apologize, but what is SBF application?
Good question. I think it has to do with their badger care, so their the insurance piece of it. That could also be why there's been more meetings because we've had more applications for that. But I will clarify that for you and then get back to you.
Silver dynamite for
I just have one question related to the language, the ELL. Has our district or does our community, are there programs in our community for, I know we had once talked about the program that we use for texting so that we can communicate with parents who don't speak English also. Are there programs where maybe like 2 minutes a week they can come in and basically some English teaching?
Parents.
Yes, and so that it can help bridge that, so that some of these parents are speaking English to their kids and at home too.
We have not had that. I think that might be something that I could talk with our community ed program. Yes. I know CBTV has some programs for adults in the community. Any other questions?
Right, none. Should we move on to the review of the bullying and violence policy?
So, according to board policy that we were the school board is supposed to kind of review the policies, so I included all of them there on the report. I've also included our online reporting form that we get used. That does get used not often. So students and families can do online reporting form to report bullying and harassment. They can fill it out. Who they are, they can do it. We have a website, the Bullying Prevention Zone website, so I included that there as well. Another big thing this year is we will be doing our people non-discrimination self-assessment report. This report typically gets done every 5 years, but I think during COVID, there was a little reprieve in that. Now, and they kind of revised it, now it includes 8 areas, where before it included only 3. So we'll be working on pulling a team together to kind of look at different areas. DPI gives us a guideline, and there's very specific questions we need to answer in each of those areas. Again, this is a self-assessment. This is for us to kind of look at our policies, our procedures, trends and patterns in different things, so that we can make changes if we need to. We can reflect on our practice.
Couple things to point out on the bullying aspect is that the board did a lot of work on this about 5 years ago, and I do think that that work has had a positive impact. If you look at the trends and the total numbers at the end of the report, the high year was 2018, 2019 with 108 reports. This past year, 2022, 2023, there were 55 reports. And our principals have been trained, and that's one thing we cover in our annual lead team retreat is the bullying reporting process, and our principals have done a good job with that. So we will continue to track these numbers. We'll continue to make adjustments as needed. But tonight, are there any comments or any recommendations that board members have?
I'm just curious if there's any, these are reports of reports, right? Are there, is there any way to track the resolution of reports in the sense of, I mean, you can always have reconciliation, but maybe,
Yeah.
things can get better or worse, right?
So part of the bullying report is there's a second page that talks about where the principals are, whoever investigates fills out the report, indicates kind of the resolution, what happened, if there was discipline maybe, or conference, or any recommendations maybe for to see a counselor, or anything like that. That's kept, the principals keep a copy of that so that they can go back and look at that. I would have to think about how I would report that because they're very different, and it's every individual report would probably lead to maybe something different. It's always not discipline. We might determine that it is bullying, but the person who's doing the bullying, it comes up a lot where the person maybe doing the bullying, it really is a teachable moment. Maybe they're young, and so it's more about teaching the student how to be a good person rather than discipline. So I'd have to think about how to report.
In the absence of reporting, is it data? Is it something that you're sort of tracking, or like keeping copies of those and looking over and things about the track?
Yes. Yeah. So principal sent me a copy of that form as well.
Are these on the graph or the table, all source reporting, so self by student or parent or faculty?
Or online form.
Do we get a sense for how many are faculty reported versus other students and whatnot? I would suspect there's times that
Yes.
during a busy day as a teacher, you're gonna deal with something that's not gonna make it.
Probably. Yeah.
I mean, realistically, I'm not gonna say that's probably real life.
Yes.
So, do you get a sense this is mostly staff reported, or this is?
My sense is most of these are student reports.
Yeah, student or parent, but let's double check with the bullying czar back there, Mr. Betcher. I'm sure he has expertise. Mr. Betcher, when you think about bullying reports, mostly from students, from parents, from staff members.
For us, it's mostly students and parents.
Yeah.
But sometimes not.
I'm not asking this be done, but I'm wondering what this would look like if you had a rate of reports per count of students in that building. Right?
Okay.
Downville's way smaller than Oakmont,
Oh, yeah.
right? And so is 2 and 5 similar? Is the actual rate at Oakmont quite a lot higher? Is it low, right?
Yep.
Whether you guys did it or not, it's fine. That's
Yep.
just the thought.
Well, I was curious if you could talk us through, so when those forms come to you, I guess you said a little bit, but can you talk through like what the process is?
So usually when the form comes to me, it's already been investigated. So I get it kind of as the last, I just keep it as a reporting thing. So, like the online reporting forms, they get, an email goes to the principal, it also comes to me, saying that there's a reporting form, and so then you get that. Typically with that, then I make contact with the principal to make sure they actually receive the form and that they're addressing that. But it's really, it typically is the principal who's really doing the investigating. So, talking with the student, talking with the parent, maybe talking with other students that may have been witnesses, and then determine really, is this a bullying? Is this an incident of bullying? Is it an incident of maybe something else? And then looking at whether discipline needs to happen. To be honest with you, sometimes the reporting forms come to us and they're anonymous, and we, as hard as we can think of maybe who filled this out, sometimes we just don't know. But then sometimes it gives us a reference of if it happens, maybe in a certain hallway, to be as us to be aware, do we need to be present?
I think there's really good progress in what's described here. And, when I think about like talking with parents in the community and say like, what do you think about the schools or things that concern you? Usually concerns of bullying are one of the things they mention, right? And I think it's a common worry for lots of parents. And I think it's really, I think there's been, as Joe was saying, like really huge strides in the last several years in really trying to address this and find creative solutions at the building level. So I really applaud you for that. And I think, as with the nursing topic, I'd be, I personally would be very interested in even more, creative solutions and resources to help solve the problems that we see. So just kind of curious what, to be, continue to be thoughtful and creative about how we can solve problems.
I think we've made some strides in some of the curriculum that we're using. We have a bullying prevention curriculum at our elementary school that's very targeted towards bullying. I think it's those conversations that we have with kids about being kind. I think that's a common theme that we talk about is what being kind to other people. So I think we're being very mindful of that and having those conversations with kids and pointing out when kids are not being very nice. They can have that understanding.
I've heard a lot of the lessons come home from my first grader, and I think they are very well thought out and very age appropriate and thoughtful, and about seeing people as people. It's really a big collection of skills you're teaching those early years and it really matters.
Just the last thing, I just literally went to Google and put in school district Menomonie bullying. And the first link that comes up is the bully zone with the links to the report forms. So it's that simple. If someone in the family needs to find it, like it comes up first on Google. So, great.
And to Abe's point about resources, right now I would say we're adequately staffed. And there's been a big commitment from our board and from our community. Our class sizes have been reasonable, lower than what they probably had been years and years ago. And you can look at some research and say that maybe with certain academic measures, class size isn't a huge indicator of whether or not there'll be certain academic measures met. When you look at things like bullying, there's a reason why not a lot of the reports come from staff members, because if the staff member is present, bullying behaviors are less likely to occur. So when we look at being adequately staffed, and we look at having teachers that are trained and a very good administrative team, I think that's where a lot of this is dealt with in a preventative manner. But then when you look at school finance, and I know one of the upcoming items, I'm not trying to get too far ahead of ourselves, but when we look at referendum, with the resources being provided by the state for the next 2 years, schools are gonna have two choices. They're either gonna go to referendum or they're going to cut. And we're a people business, and those reductions will come in staffing. So then, if all of a sudden you have more students per teacher, you have less principals or things like that, items like bullying are going to get worse. So I think a real big piece of this is that we're adequately staffed and we're well trained, and hopefully we can continue to be that way.
I'd like to say there's some other activities too that have been, I think, healthy, like the trust adults for each student. I think that was the helpful as well, to keep that going and moving, because I think that can kind of set off some issues that could come up.
I had a question about the self-evaluation report. It's helpful to know that DPI has changed some of those standards because the report from 2017 looks a lot shorter than what the goal of this would have to include. But I was curious, so it looks like some of the newer bullets include, I'm thinking specifically about like the trends in pupil harassment and the trends in disciplinary actions. As you take a look at that, does the framework provided by DPI or do we as a district plan to sort of look at that through a lens of some of the other demographic breakdowns of what's going on in schools? So for example, English language learners, students of color.
Break that data down. How many are male, female, how many of different cultural backgrounds, what does that look like if we break that down? I think some of the reason there's more of this is that we actually have tools to actually break that data down. We're not doing it necessarily by hand anymore. We actually have some tools that can break that down.
I would like to add to that this is a good process, and I think it's an important process. At the same time, if it takes us to have our, how often is this in Antonia? If it takes us every 5-year reporting to figure out that we have those issues, that would probably be a travesty. What I can tell you is that we're constantly analyzing our behavior data, both the numbers, but also the anecdotal data. And for instance, just to give you 2 easy examples, we had a brief period this year, I think it was about a 2-week window, we were noticing an uptick in poor behaviors that we attributed to some racial, tension's not the right word, but some racial issues. And we addressed that right away. In fact, I sent a message to all families and staff talking about that. Another area that we've noticed over the years has been an increase in harassment dealing with online social media type of stuff. And, as we've identified that, we've brought in resources, we've got speakers, we've, through our daily announcements and through our character education program, emphasize it with our students. So again, this is a good process, and perhaps it'll tell us something that didn't stand out already, but this is something that we take very seriously and that we talk about often.
Your department and all the people that work with do a great job.
Any additional questions or comments on the bullying and harassment policy? Now we'll move on to the review of the 2023-24 work plan.
So Ray, do you want me just to go ahead? So board members, we've talked about this a couple times now, and trying to identify maybe main issues that board members thought were important, and also I know you wanted to get input from the leadership team. And one of the items we talked about is that it's important to have a work plan that's not going to be too comprehensive, with the fact that we know that there's some big items coming up, especially related to school funding, potential referendum, et cetera. Well, when we had our administrative retreat and we started going through the items that we know need to be done, this list quickly expanded. And as you can see, it's pretty similar to being as comprehensive as it has been the last several years. But all these items are extremely important. They're also well aligned with the strategic plan. I hate to go through and read items one by one, but I you don't mind, I think it's probably worth it to at least, mention these items. So under pillar one, when we're talking about college career and life ready graduates, the new legislation, Wisconsin Act 20, about improving literacy outcomes, we know that that's going to need to be a priority for our school district, and we plan to work on that and provide the board an update by January 1. We also plan to have our faculty committee do a program review in the area of career and technical education, and that goes in alignment with Mr. Saquon's schedule and what's already been planned. Then we're going to update goals and action plans related to the environmental site. We know that that's something that we continue to strive for and that we continue to improve, and that's something we think needs to be prioritized this year, as well as continuing our efforts with the Education for Employment initiative and bring that plan back to the board by June 30th. In Pillar 2, Student Social and Emotional Wellness, as Amy just mentioned just a minute ago, we plan to continue and expand upon our goal of having every student in the district being able to identify an adult in the SDMA with whom they trust. We plan to report to the board progress by June 30th. Tony mentioned the self-assessment and stance of non-discrimination and quality of educational opportunities. We will have that report for the board by the end of the school year. Review and update tiered levels of SEL instruction and services as part of our MLSS, multi-level system of support. That's going to be implemented and reported to the board. We also have our SEL survey, and we'll be reporting those results to the board by June 30th. We plan to review and update our inventory of mental wellness resources for students and families, and we'll share that progress with you. And then continue to respond to problems related to bullying and harassment, as we just talked about in the report, and we'll report back to you again next summer. Pillar 3, our talented workforce. We do have our new teacher compensation salary schedule that needs continued work in terms of accelerated movement. We were able to work with our staff before the end of the school year to get some initial feedback, and we will continue to work with our staff, and we hope to have that all finalized and ready for the board before October 31st. We'll continue to provide robust professional development, and part of that is conducting a professional development needs assessment. Mr. Seguin and his team will do that. We kind of have a rotating schedule, and this is the year that we will continue with that. We are planning to collaborate with UW Stealth this fall during our professional development day in October, and we will have a bunch of professional development related to mental wellness, and we'll share progress with the board by June 30th. And then also continue to expand upon our efforts to build a positive school climate, and we'll report that to the board next summer as well. Moving down to Pillar 4, Parent and Community Partnerships. And this is one of the ideas that came forward from the board. By October 15th, we plan to share with families tips for using translation tools that are available on the district platform for translating district communications to different languages. We already have many tools, but I'm concerned that perhaps not people don't know we have those tools or they don't know how to use them. So we want to get that out here at the beginning of the school year, and we think that's an important goal. Depending on what the board determines to do with the budget and a potential referendum, any kind of plans or parameters, we would like to have that ironed out by November 1st. And we would like to think about expanding our strategic plan. It really is coming due here in 2024, so there needs to be a process in place for 2025 to 2030, and we will have a plan for the board to consider by May 1st. We continue to expand the streaming of school district events, and we will share a summary report to the board next summer. And we want to continue to expand upon parent and community partnerships during the 2023-2024 school year. And again, we plan to report that to the board. Lastly, we want to continue to expand upon our efforts for improving the district website and social media presence over the next school year. And I'm sure we'll have plenty of progress to share by June 30th. Finally, the fifth pillar of our strategic plan, facilities and operations. The sports complex project at the high school is just about done. We will provide a summary report of that entire project by January 1st. We continue to look for ways to reduce energy use in the district, it's a pretty aggressive goal of 5% because we've already been dropping our energy use year after year. But we're gonna try to get another 5% in 2023, 2024. And then finally, our 30-year capital improvement plan, we plan to update that. Every year we update it. This year, we're gonna try to focus even more on how inflation has impacted that plan. And we may have to do some reprioritizing, based on changing district needs and funding levels. So that's kind of where we're at. I don't know if board members have any other comments. We're not asking for your approval of the work plan tonight. We plan to bring it back at the next meeting. But if you have ideas, now's a great time to discuss that.
Okay, so I have one question. Pillar 3, the first point, the accelerated movement compensation schedule, I think that was something where it seemed in QIC that a lot of people had wanted to really make sure they had trust in the process. I'm wondering if you feel there's going to be enough contact and collaboration by October 31st, and people kind of your semester going, and then, that might just be around the corner.
I think there could be potential benefits of delaying that past October 31st. But one of the reasons why we felt that date was important is that if we are going to implement it for the 24-25 school year, we think it's important that people know what the kind of the rules or the expectations will be by October 31st, considering that contract renewals happen in May. So the longer we wait, the less time people will have to plan or make adjustments or meet the expectations of whatever the final determination is.
Do you think the different buildings and departments already have this in their radar in terms of like discussing what each group thinks it needs out of that sort of, there's a lot of discussion about like what different things would qualify for advancement and so on, so.
I would hope so. Like I said, we did a survey with staff before they left for the summer. This received a lot of attention when staff compensation plans were approved last spring. So, I would hope that it's on the radar, and certainly we'll need to reemphasize it here when people get back in August. But for some reason, if October 31st becomes a problem, the board has not had an issue before in extending deadlines. But I think it's better to have, kind of a aggressive or early goal. And then if there is good reason to bump that back, we certainly can request more time.
The QIC meets quarterly, correct?
Correct.
So is there, I assume not on the calendar, I guess, for the plan for more or less the first meeting of the school year?
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head, but usually it's, before October 31st.
Sure. I was kind of wondering, like, if it bumped into into a second meeting, how that would mesh with the timeline.
Yeah, I don't think the QIC schedule is going to hold us up. We've had special QIC meetings before, and frankly, this is an issue that, involves such a large number of staff. Well, the QIC can be a good group for maybe whittling some of it down. Certainly, I would plan to share plans with the entire staff and provide the entire staff opportunity for feedback, just like we did last spring with the survey that we used.
Joe, I think this is the easy one for the electrical or the energy reduction of 5%. Is that 5% of current use or 5% of some prior baseline?
It would be 5% of this previous year. Yes.
Okay.
And like I said, that might be too ambitious, but when I said aggressive before, ambitious was the word I was looking for. I just thought of it now. So I apologize if
Ambitious,
did well.
but attainable.
I think so. I mean, I would hope so. And, there are some projects like LED lighting projects that, are on our plans. I don't know that those projects are going to be anything that's able to get done in 2024, 2025, especially in a time to realize the savings. But again, I think having an ambitious goal and setting a good target for Steve Thomas, our energy manager, is a good idea.
I had a question about the translation tools and sharing tips with parents, and obviously this is one very small thing, but I wondered about something I wondered, I guess, as a parent, as a PTO member, speaking off my work. Like, is the ability to work with, the kind of existing PTOs and the Title I meetings that happen at some of our schools. And again, I'm thinking mostly of elementary schools, but there's a real opportunity, I think, for reaching parents there in a setting where they, if parents aren't opening their email, or if they're not reading the newsletter that comes out. I think that in the school setting is a place where folks are hearing more or feel more able to ask questions. And I wonder if there's an opportunity there that especially at the start of the school year on those orientation days. Knowing that's coming up very soon. Could also just be food for thought. Other questions or comments on the work plan? It does seem like a lot when college written out like this, but nowhere these are a lot of the work that's going to be happening anyway. And it's great to have it all in.
So bring this back for approval at the next meeting.
All right, next up, discuss information and timelines for a referendum.
So over the past several weeks, in the district office here, we continue to work on the 2023, 2024 budget in preparation for the annual meeting. Excuse me. And the annual meeting is scheduled for Monday, August 21st. As you know, Governor Evers signed the budget on July 5th. And although the biennial budget provides some new revenue for schools over the next 2 years, it does not provide public schools with enough resources to account for high inflation and replace the federal pandemic funding on which the district needed to operate over the past 2 years. Now, in the district, we've had a long history of balancing the district budget, but it is a near certainty that programming will need to be cut and important technology and facility maintenance needs will have to be deferred unless the district can raise more revenue. Excuse me. So in Wisconsin, the amount of revenue that school districts are allowed to raise is capped by the state imposed revenue limit. And for the first time, I believe in 5 years, this year, our revenue limit is going to go up a little bit. And we certainly appreciate that, but it still just isn't enough to account for the high inflation and the fiscal cliff that was created with the pandemic money. The Association for Equity and Funding has some good resources and details, and I linked them into board docs, and it's available for the public to look at. If anybody would like to see the history of school funding in Wisconsin, it also has some suggestions about some of the challenges that we have with Wisconsin school financing and funding formula. So it's almost a near certainty that referendum is going to be needed unless we're going to make big cuts. If you look at the graphic that I posted on board docs that was put together by R.W. Baird, a large majority of Wisconsin school districts have already passed operating referendum. And how that impacts us is kind of interesting. Not only does it give school districts that aren't Menomonie more revenue in the current year when they pass a referendum or for all the years that they pass the referendum for, but then in future years, they're able to get a bigger piece of the pie when it comes to state aid. It's a complicated formula, but to summarize it, or maybe oversimplify it a little bit, the aid that we receive from the state is largely dependent on how much we spend the prior year. So if all of these other schools are going to referendum and they're allowed to increase their revenue, and then they spend more, they're going to continue to get a bigger piece of that pie in most cases, which means there's less of the state aid for Menomonie to capture. So in a way, schools like Menomonie who haven't gone to referendum, in a sense, it's almost like we're putting ourselves behind in not getting the state funding and putting more of it on the local tax levy. Knowing that this fiscal cliff was coming, we've tried to take steps and minimize budget shortfalls during the 2023-2024 school year. I think we're going to do pretty well this year. We were able to defer some expenses. We were able to carry over a little bit of the pandemic money that was probably, we thought originally going to be needed to get by last year, but it's not a sustainable solution. So while I feel pretty comfortable that we will be able to bridge the gap 2023, 2024, it's almost a certainty that 2024, 2025 is going to have a pretty significant deficit. So this is where it goes to the board. The board is going to have to decide, what do we want to do? Is it a situation where we want us to start cutting back? We have decisions to make even in the next few weeks about how many sections of kindergarten that we're going to have. All these decisions are going to add up. And, cutting back is possible, but it's very difficult. And like I said, it leaves state aid on the table for someone else to take. The other option is to begin planning for a referendum. There's all sorts of different options that the board can have. How much to go for certainly is one of the big questions. And then what kind of operating referendum, whether it's something that would be recurring or whether it was something that would expire after a certain number of years. The real challenge with going to referendum that would expire is that, again, we're a people business, and most of the expenses we're talking about are people. They're teachers, they're paraeducators, they're custodians, they're administrators. And if we have a referendum that's going to sunset after 3 years or after 5 years or even after 7 years, we're really creating a fiscal cliff in our school district. The recurring referendums certainly are more difficult to pass. At the same time, from a finance standpoint, from an operational standpoint, they provide school districts and organizations with much more stability. So that's some background. Board members, I also shared a bunch of information about possible timelines that have been prepared for schools. The School Board Association has provided reference guides. Baird, our financial advisors have, as has Quarles and Brady, the bond attorneys that school districts typically work with in this area, if referendum is something that the board wants to do. So that's kind of a summary of information, and really comes down to what the board sees as the best option for our district.
I'm not in favor of cutting, so don't misunderstand my question. I thought it might be helpful if we had an idea of how many cuts would be necessary if we didn't put it up. And obviously not now, but I just thought that might be a helpful piece of information. Maybe more for.
And that's part of the challenge with the timeline. Even this budget and the annual meeting that we have in August is going to be largely built on predictions. And Leah and I talk about that every August at the annual meeting, that, we're going to give the board and the community the best prediction that we can. But most of our funding is based on our enrollment. We won't know that until the middle of September. And even then, we won't know our state aid until October. And then we won't know our property valuation until October. And that's why the board is the entity that sets the final budget and sets the tax levy at the end of October. So Leah certainly has models, and I'm sure she'll be working with our financial advisors because we still have to predict. And the question you asked, Dale, is right on. And we will provide that for the board before October, as early as we can. Right now we're just beginning the audit process for this past year. We're working very closely with the auditors this week, and then there's several follow-up communications that will occur before the audit is finalized in December. But I would say after we get through the next couple of weeks, I think we'll have a much more clear picture of how the past year ended up, what the next year will be, and then from there we can try to build some scenarios. But if I was just gonna, take a guess, I'm thinking anywhere between $2 and $4 million is what the structural deficit is at this time.
Presumably, this way finance work, that would probably grow over time, and that's how money works typically. So That's me saying that, not you, but.
No, I think he's right. You know, we thought that the board was being very ambitious when we did our compensation plans for this next year. And I think the board recognized the teacher shortage and recognized the importance of a very ambitious compensation plan. And I found out that some of our neighbors, you know, they've essentially matched or gone beyond what the board decided to do. And, you know, you don't like getting a bidding war, but at the same time, it's reality. There's only so many teachers, there's only so many employees available. And if we want to have the best educators working with our kids, we're going to have to stay competitive. So to Abe's point, yes, it probably will continue to grow.
The second question, we've heard reference saying about the being most logical. But my question is, what if 3, 4, 5 years down the road we find out that that doesn't cover it? What happens then?
No matter what the board decides to do immediately or this year, future boards could do more. You know, so yeah, I think you want to go to referendum based on what you think you're going to need. But in the event that, you know, inflation continues this way longer than what people predict, or some other mandates come through that require us to add, you know, more staffing, whatever it might be, the boards at that time could go for another referendum. In fact, many schools have gotten into that cycle of approve a compensation plan, go to referendum, approve a bunch of building stuff, go to referendum. And, you know, that's how a lot of school districts are managing their finances now. We have not done that. You know, we have tried to pay down our long-term debt. We've tried to plan ahead for any kind of unfunded liabilities. You know, retirement is a good example. We've transferred our early retirement, local retirement plan and benefits from a defined benefit to a defined contribution. We have our 30-year capital improvement fund. Not many schools have that, where we've planned out for 30 years what our facility needs are going to be, and we have been saving for that. You know, we've tried to be very, very conscientious here in Menomonie, but the fact of the matter is that you can, as a school board, ask voters for an additional referendum if needed. On the flip side of that, and I was part of a referendum in Council at the beginning of my career, it's also possible to ask voters for permission to exceed the revenue limit and not use that permission to the full amount. And I think that's something that, you know, the taxpayers would need to really trust the school board. But it's possible to ask for a certain level of revenue and then actually go through your budget. And if all of a sudden the state or the federal government or some other entity provides the school district with more revenue than what was anticipated in those models, the school board is not obligated to raise the revenue that is passed by the referendum.
So I think right here, so the operating referendum is an up to amount, right? It's so that the district would be asking for permission to set you know, local rates up to a certain amount, but whether it actually meets that amount is up to also the variables into the yearly budgeting process.
Yes, it's not to exceed. You cannot go over without additional permission, but you can stay under.
For the sake of the discussion, would it be fair to say that when we talk about inflation, we're not just talking about 6 months of rapid inflation that happened after COVID? We're talking about decades of reimbursement or revenue that did not keep up with any inflation that we were having. Is that a fair way to say it?
Yes, in fact, and that, I'll make a note of it. There's some pretty good graphics out there that show what inflation has been since revenue limits began in the 90s and where the actual revenue limit would be today if it tracked with inflation, and it's significantly below that. Schools have had to cut just to maintain services that they had in the 90s because funding has not kept up with inflation.
something I was struck by was a graphic which showed that those inflation number, basically the revenue per pupil since I was a student in Wisconsin. And shocking to think of how much less students are getting now than I got when I was in that position, so. I just want to say, I think this item has a lot of great details and attachments, so thank you for assembling it all, and we have a lot to think about. But I think we have the facts kind of laid out in terms of what the considerations are, and I look forward to kind of, as we get into the budget numbers throughout the next month, really thinking about carefully.
Anybody else? Jay?
I am curious, so you have 3 different timelines laid out for potential referendum date. The earliest one being February. And if we took that one as an example, right, our first date on here is on our reports December 9th. But really, can you maybe talk realistically about like what happens between now and December 9th, or what are some of the kind of timelines to watch out for?
Sure. Well, again, I think we need to get through our audit, at least the beginning portion, the heavy lifting part of the audit. I'd say that's step number 1. And at that point, we'll have a clearer picture of where the 2022-2023 budget year ended. Leah has a very good picture, but until you go through the audit, and there's a number of year-end items that, really go through now, schools can still make contributions to Fund 73, Fund 46, all the way through July 31st. So we're still wrapping up 2022, 2023. After that portion gets done, and we're almost done with that portion after the next couple of weeks, then it really goes to the annual meeting. And that's going to be the best projection that we can give you for the 2023-2024 school year. I would not base a referendum decision solely on the annual meeting. Then we get to October, and by the end of October, that's when things really start to get nailed down. And the budget continues to change throughout the year, but at the end of October, the board approves the budget and the board sets the tax levy. So to me, that's really where not only do we have 2023 pretty much wrapped up, we also have 2023, 2024 variable map. So I would say by the end of October, that's when we could have very solid projections. But again, the projections are based on hypotheticals. It is only the first year of the state biennial budget, so we can give a pretty good projection, a pretty accurate projection for what 2024, 2025 will be. Going beyond that gets really difficult, but we can still predict based on trends and past history what the next several years beyond that will be. So I would say that by the very early November, that would be a realistic timeline when the board could actually look at amounts and how long.
Thank you.
I think also say that the information gave us from different presentations and guides was really well put together. I enjoyed reading it.
Yeah, thank you, Dale. And I do want to point out that there's a lot of good resources, and gathering them was difficult enough, and we appreciate the work that our partners have done. And again, there's been a lot of schools that have already done this, and we've been able to learn from some of those experiences. I mentioned, I've been through an operational referendum at the beginning of my career, so I know what that part is like as well. And I think even though you had a chance, 5 days to review this, I would encourage board members to continue to try to digest it, and please don't hesitate to reach out with questions or ideas, because the more research and the more back and forth we can have now, I think will really help the decision-making process when we get to the end of October, early November.
I'd like to agree with Gail about all documents. I thought they were very helpful. One thing I just wanted to ask, and I know we're not really deciding like today, if we're going to wait till November till we figure out a timeline. But my question is,
how soon would we need the dollars to do for 24-25 school year? I mean, when would be the best time to get that money if we were to figure out a date for a referendum?
I'm glad you asked that, and that's actually something I was refreshed on, in talking with our advisors that I had, it's been a while. And, certainly if the district went to referendum in February or April of 2024, we would easily be able to apply that permission to the 24-25 school year. What I had forgotten about is that it is possible to go to referendum in November 2024 and still have that applied to the 2024-2025 budget. It's a little bit tricky, but districts do it a lot. The board at the end of October 2024 would then approve 2 budgets and 2 tax levies based on both scenarios, whether the referendum passed or whether the referendum failed. So in the event that it passed, you could then certify that budget and that tax levy, which could still be applied to the 2024-2025 fiscal year. And that really is the fiscal year where we're projecting we're going to see the big deficit.
That would give us the flexibility too, that if we decided to go for in February, and a referendum failed, we would have.
That is possible. I'm optimistic that, the board does a good job, really looking at the projections and, thinking about what's best for the community and the school district. I'm very hopeful that, whatever is offered, whether it be February or April, will get the support of our community. But I do think it's important to have a plan B, Rachel, and I think that's a reasonable plan B, to come back in November with a different plan if needed.
When you look at these date timelines, and a big part of the budget, of course, is planning the next year. In your mind, even aside from the technicalities of a referendum, how helpful is it to have things be earlier so you can lay down plans and salaries and all that business?
It's huge, and, when I think about that, February compared to April is a big difference. Because when you look at our staffing plans, when you look at our compensation plans, having that extra time, especially with how difficult it is now to recruit and retain quality staff, if we have to be on hold until first part of April, that's problematic. In fact, you may have to take a leap of faith knowing that you could deplete your fund balance if it doesn't pass, because if we wait that long, we really could be in a difficult situation. That's the other problem about the Plan B, waiting till the following November. Well, you would already have your staff hired, you would already have your compensation plans done, and if you failed in November, you'd be in a situation where, whatever it is, $2.5, $3, $4 million could be coming out of your fund balance. And next thing you know, you're short-term borrowing just to make payroll, which we could still operate the district, but it would just be, it's a double-edged sword. Now you're paying interest on cash flow, and it's a vicious cycle. And we're so fortunate that we're not in that cycle. But I think the next 12, probably less than 12 months, 6 to 12 months is going to be huge in determining how our district operates moving forward.
And to be clear, that vicious cycle of short-term borrowing is exactly what would end up happening if there were not a referendum. Because unless they're, in addition to or along with significant cuts to programming and so.
I would sure think so, Abe. Right now we have a sufficient fund balance, but it's not flush to the point. Because again, we only receive revenue from the state and from tax payments periodically throughout the year. It's not like it's, evened out throughout the entire year. It's, you get a chunk here, you get a chunk there, and that's where Leah, I'm sure, loses sleep at night, making sure that all the accounts are where they need to be. So we don't have to use a line of credit or short-term borrowing. When I came here, it's the start of my 10th year, when I came here, that was one of the priorities that we had, that the board had right away. And we established a plan for financial security for the school district. And that was item number 1, make sure our fund balance is adequate so that we don't have to waste money on short-term borrowing. We got that done. We took care of some issues related to health insurance. We took care of issues related to unfunded liabilities related to retirement. We took care of a lot of issues. Then we got ahead of the game and we did some refinancing and saved millions of dollars of long-term interest. We also were able to start the capital improvement fund and, save millions of dollars knowing that, we have 7 schools and 8 buildings plus the environmental site. We have a big footprint, and although our buildings have been well kept and they're in good shape, it's like a house. You're gonna have to put, money into it, whether you're talking about roofs or boilers. And, a lot of our work was done in the 90s. So we're now 2023, right? Well, a lot of that work done in the 90s, we're getting to that point where, if you had a house of 30 years, you'd expect to have to replace things. And again, our building and grounds and maintenance crew has done a great job. But if we don't continue to plan ahead, if we don't look to the future a little bit, it's going to get ugly pretty quick.
I just have one question. In looking at the Baird presentation, there are a couple of slides on there, slides 8 and 9, that show the 10-year history for recurring and non-recurring referendum that has failed and passed. Do they have reasons why they failed, or have we learned from the history of those so that if we go forward, we don't repeat the same mistakes as to why theirs failed?
Yeah, it's pretty simple why the recurring referendums fail more often than the non-recurring is because the non-recurring expires. And oftentimes taxpayers feel more comfortable with that. But I think in many cases that's short-sighted because again, most of the expenses in the operating referendum are going to be long-term expenses, not one-time items, especially when you talk about staffing, especially when you talk about programming and service. So if you do a 3-year referendum or a 5-year referendum, it's awfully hard to recruit and retain a quality teacher when they know that they're being funded, or there's, all the teachers, for instance, or all the administrators, their salaries are being funded by revenue that is not guaranteed to go beyond 3 years or 5 years. At the same time, from a taxpayer standpoint, it takes a lot of trust for them to know that the board, the current board, the future board, is not going to tax for more than what they need. So, from the taxpayer standpoint, I can see why, some taxpayers would prefer to have a non-recurring referendum that will sunset. But I think you really lose a lot of bang for the buck that way because what you can do with that revenue then is more limited in terms of any kind of long-term planning and long-term programming.
You can see on a couple of those, I think, with non-recurring, some of those same districts passed and failed, so there must have been multiples in that time period, that 10-year history. I don't know what they are, but down here you can see.
For example, I know local example, I think it's Hudson, has went to referendum many, many, many times before it finally passed. For example, I think Joe said earlier, that the recurring referendum is a heavier lift, but it's also is a more sustainable and kind of future-looking solution to the problem, right? Doesn't just trap you in the same cycle over and over and over.
There was a good article in the WASB newsletter either in April or May after the spring elections about referendums and kind of they were maybe anecdotal in that they were looking at, I can't remember how many, but maybe 3 or 4 different spots around the state, but it was really interesting. I had a couple questions. Have you talked, when you've talked to advisors or about this, have you looked at the possibility of multiple referenda on one ballot? Is it like a recurring and non-recurring? And what do you think about that?
Well, and I think that might go to some of what Angie just mentioned. In my understanding, when there are multiple questions on the ballot, there's less success because many times it's confusing for the voter. And also, I think it can be also overwhelming because you certainly need to explain very, very well what's being asked for and why it's needed. And if there's multiple questions, I think that can really cloud both of those items. The good news is that our school district facilities and what we've done with our facility planning allows us to really focus on operating. Most of the time when there are multiple questions, it's because the school district is in a situation where not only do they need to deal with operating issues and having enough funds for programming, but they also have facility issues. I think our school district has done a good job taking facilities out of the picture through our planning, so we can focus primarily on operating.
That's thank you to the voters too, because we did have referendums, a building referendum, and that's why our buildings are up to par, especially with safety issues.
Any additional questions or comments?
I guess one real quick question. Do districts often or commonly involve a supportive group, or whether it's Whitley or some other consulting group that is experienced in this to support them through these processes? Is that common or?
Yeah, Baird advises and has advised many school districts on referendum. And, you can see that presentation from Baird, and actually I appreciate Rachel. She's the one that got that at the school board convention in January. And Quarles and Brady, which I also shared some information from them, they're more bond attorneys, so they're more dealing with the legal aspects. In terms of like a PR firm, and I'm sure some school districts have gone beyond Baird and beyond, or companies like Baird or things like that. I don't know that is something that is necessary at this point, but it's certainly something that could be considered.
There's resources out there, just if we, as a group, said that would be.
School Perceptions has done surveys that are kind of both gathering information and disseminating information.
Also, if you read the legal notes, there are also some kind of tricky things about what the district and, districting, providing information versus advocacy, and some fine lines there, which of course, ties into that consultancy question as well.
So we'll probably see this as another discussion item in upcoming board meetings.
Yeah, I don't know if, at this point, I don't have a clear, target date other than, what we have planned for the annual meeting and the budget meetings in October. But if school board members would like to discuss this more, or as you read through the information, you have more questions that you think would be important for the board to discuss, certainly, let Rachel know or let me know, and we could add it to an agenda. Otherwise, I would anticipate probably sometime at the end of October would be where it really starts to get narrowed down to a potential recommendation.
Might be worthwhile right now to do a reminder that anyone can submit a request for an agenda item. Yeah. The deadline is on Wednesday, right?
Yep, any school board member.
Sorry, yeah, any school board.
Joan, you don't have to know the answer to this if there isn't one. I just noticed this. So we've done a very good job of not having to go to referendum. And we're part on the one single map you sent of a small cluster of districts that have not been since I was in high school, had to pass an operating referendum. I said, if that's us, then there's Colfax, there's Boyceville, there's London City. What is it about this cluster of districts here where they've all been able to avoid that, yet get pretty decent outcomes?
That's a really good question, Carl, because it does seem to follow almost like the interstate corridor just a little bit there. I don't have an answer for you on that. I think it might also have to do with the makeup of the communities and the school boards that have been elected to represent the community, making decisions.
Like, why is it? Yeah, because when you look at some of those other areas, I can think of some of these areas I wouldn't want to send my kid. I don't think there's a lot of economic development happening, compared to our area here. So I think it's a challenge, this opportunity too. We're set up in a system where voters have a bigger say in whether or not your school's gonna get funded locally. And I think our community cares a lot about our kids. So I do see it as an opportunity.
One thing you might want to do and I suspect a partial answer to your question, Carl, is that if you look at the other map that has been, at least in this list, those two before, with what the revenue limits are for different districts based on the cutoff 15 years ago or whatever, that there may be wildly different budgets that are allowed without a referendum based on simply what they were like in the mid-90s. And so it's very hard to compare that methodology compared to the revenue limit map.
Very good point. Thank you.
So Jenny just pulled it up on the screen, I think, what he was referencing, or Carl was referencing, and this is available, again, for the public in Word docs. And I know it's probably pretty small back there, and actually, I think we're just talking to the administrative team right now. Maybe someone's watching online, but, and I don't know, Steve, if you could zoom up on this at all, but if you look at that, that's a map of the state, and all the school districts are outlined. And all the school districts in blue are school districts that have already passed an operating referendum. And because my technology skills are limited, I used a red pen. And I circled the school district of the Menomonie area in red. And, you can see that there really aren't that many school districts that are white in this graph, indicating that they have not had an operating referendum yet. And I would suggest and predict that this map will be nothing but more blue over the next year or two.
Do you think, I'm curious, and maybe you don't have an answer yet, as you plan out what you want to talk about at the annual meeting, will pictures like this be part of that, or is it going to be strictly about the numbers? It's really your call. I'm just kind of curious if you think that's an appropriate forum to discuss the sort of map.
The budget hearing really will be focusing on the 2023-2024 budget, but I do think that making some comments and providing some information about the future of our budget and the future of our financing is appropriate. So Leah and I have not got to the point where we are rehearsing for the annual meeting yet. But as we get to that point, Abe, I think your suggestion is well founded.
Do the referendums, whether it's recurring or non-recurring, have usually different voices, or is it different?
Simple majority.
So when we say that it's more difficult to pass the recurring one, it's not numbers, it's about whether people want it.
Correct.
Okay, moving on, we have legislative advocacy. We know content here in advance, but we want to.
Legislative session is pretty quiet now.
And I guess that's one thing I wanted to ask the board. Would it be appropriate maybe not to have that as a standing agenda item for a while? And then if legislation comes forward that the administrative team or the board feels is necessary to discuss, then we could put it back on.
That's fine with me. I think it was very active from December until June, but now it's going to be much quieter. But I think that, yeah, at your discretion, but since it come up, there's lots of bills bouncing around involving schools and libraries and all sorts of things. Be aware of those.
And like Rachel mentioned, it's really easy for board members to shoot an email to Rachel or me the Wednesday prior to the board meeting by noon and just say that you have something legislatively you'd like to address. But yeah, I think this is probably 2 or 3 meetings in a row where we really haven't had any background submitted.
Would you want that on the agenda request form, or because it's an on and off standing thing? Right, do a form.
I don't want to speak for Rachel, but to me, it really doesn't matter,
Before is that important.
especially for an item like this that's already been.
All right, moving on to track. A couple of months. And this is just for our information, no need to approve. Any questions? All right, items related to next meeting dates or committees and reports. We have our regular board meeting August 14th and our annual meeting August 21st at the high school. August 28th is the meet and greet day at the schools and our special board meeting. And then August 29th, the first day of school with buses. September 4th, no school, Labor Day. We have our regular board meeting September 11th. Homecoming, September 22nd, that came on the schedule already. And the special board meeting, September 25th. We also got an email this week about WASB fall meetings, and is that something that board members, could follow up with Jenny if they'd like to attend? That's what we got, in October.
Yeah, that'd be great.
The meet and greet day, is that the, last year I remember the teacher orientation, we were invited to, is that the same event?
No, the meet and greet day is when families can bring their children into the classroom. We are finalizing the in-service. What day is it, Brian? And approximate time? We'll make sure we email you. But no, the Abe was talking about board members coming in. That was new teacher orientation. That was before that. We'll make sure we get that in writing to you. But again, Brian, that was August 17th. At what time? 11:30 and yeah, it's a luncheon for new teachers. Great.
And the 22nd is still ready for the in-service. Okay, we'll get that in an email. All right, so I entertain, you want to take a 5-minute break before we move into closed session? We do that? All right,